Seems on live. Okay, there's nobody in the chat yet, so wonder if anybody will show up tonight. And else, I guess this will just be something people will watch um, when it's online, I guess. I'm just gonna have a listen. Alright. Well, I'm very sorry. The audio is very choppy. This is my first stream, so I am not sure what OBS is having a problem with my mic, because that's this one. I always use that for my tutorials, and as you know, in my tutorials, it works fine. Hey, Gillis, how are you? So yeah, I'm not quite sure why the audio is so choppy. We'll figure that out at some point, I guess. Hi, Ask Gentoft. How are you? Oh, okay. I'm gonna give it a few minutes, see who all shows up in the chat. I'm also going to go and keep this open to monitor how my video is going. Let's see. That all works okay. There we go. Can you all hear me all right? Is it not too bad with the audio? Or I'm not quite sure if I can do anything about it right now. Hi, Charles. Reduce the buffer size. I'm not quite sure. I can't really find the buffer size setting in OBS for some reason. Then again, I am relatively new to OBS, so... Stream input. Oh, command jet. Yeah, it's possible. Let's see. What other options are there for this audio? There actually aren't that many options in it. That's a weird thing about it. Advanced audio options. What does this say? That's off. In the encoding settings. Yeah, luckily at least I can be heard. Hold on, I'm gonna put that a little bit down. Maybe it's just being. Let me know if that is better. I just turned the volume down a little bit. Maybe it's just going too high. That's possible. Settings and encoding. Where do I find my encoding settings? So the encoder is set to NVENC, but there aren't any additional options. Oh, audio bit rates. Maybe I need to put the audio bit rate up a bit. So let's try that. I'm gonna put that. Okay, the streaming audio bit rate will be set to 160, which is the highest. Okay. Alright, so it doesn't go higher than 160. And that is just for the recording, and we're not recording right now, so let's see if this makes a difference. Yeah, I'm wondering if it could be because I'm using 3 USB ports fully, so maybe it's buffering on the USB that it's having problems with. Let me see. I'm going to tinker around with this for a few more minutes, but also it's just going to have to do for the first stream, I'm afraid. I don't think I can change the frequency while the stream is ongoing, actually. Hold on, I just want to see. Well, there's supposed to be 3 USB 3 ports on this laptop, but it is an older laptop, so it's possible that it has something to do with it. All right. Okay, now one problem that I do have is my chat's over there, and my computer is over there. So, power saving mode? High performance power mode? I don't know. The thing is, OBS says that it's only using about 6% of the CPU, so it's not really overpowering this computer. Yeah, I don't know, because I'm thinking if I should just be running the audio through the computer that I'm actually working on, which is the one that you're seeing the desktop for. But I'll have to do some more experimenting with that tomorrow over the weekend. Let's just see where we can go for it. I'll try and keep my eye on the chat a little bit and see what you guys are saying. Yeah, it might be saturation of the USB box. That's very possible. Now it's on 44.1 kilohertz, so that should be fine. I don't think I can even change that after I start recording. I wonder if I can. Hold on, let me just quickly Google that and see if I can. Can I get Audacity to OBS? Can I do that? For OBS. Maybe I can go. No, that's just asking for that. Now I'll have to have a look at that once when I have a little bit more time. We'll just try and see how we go with our setup today. So hopefully you guys can understand what I'm saying, and it won't be too bad with the audio not being where it should be. And yeah. All right. That's all good. That's all good. All right, so I want to have a look tonight at our old little VR weapons tutorial. I don't know how many of you have had a look at the series about that. Windows sound control panel match OBS sound control panel. Is there a setting there for open sound settings? The microphone. Device properties. Only says volume here. Additional device properties. Use this device. Levels. Advanced. Yeah, it's on 44.1 kilohertz. One channel, 16 bits. Yeah, it looks like it's set up fine. Very strange. Okay. Yeah, so the sample rate in the Windows sound control panel is also set to 44.1 kilohertz, so that's not the problem either. I'm wondering any other thing that I can think of, but let's have a look. Okay, we're gonna get double sound now. Let's see how bad this is. I just switched to the microphone on my laptop. Let's see if that one works. There's a nice delay in YouTube always, so I need to wait for about a second or two before I hear whether I've made it worse or better. Alright, let's add a noise suppression to that. Alright, just added the noise suppression, see if that takes out all the nice noise that we have on this. But the choppiness is gone on this mic at least. Oh, that's not bad actually, that's not bad. Oh. Okay, that I'll let's see how it goes if I'm actually talking towards the screen that I'm working on, and see if that makes any difference. So I think that we're probably overloading the USB bus on this computer. So I need to I'll need to figure that out, because I much rather use my proper mic, because the sound is normally better on that one. But yeah. Yeah, I think that works fine. Let me know how it goes. We're going to have a bit of a look at the weapons tutorial. This is the version that I've got on GitHub, which has the simple interior for this environment. I'm just going to take this out because I don't need that in anymore. Not the beautiful one that I've used in my videos. First of all, I had to reinstall one of my computers, so I need to get that one back from an archive. But also because I want to update the version that we have on GitHub. I'm working with that one, and I'll eventually retrofit the level that I bought into this. What I want to do right now is retrofit a couple of things that I've done in my other tutorials, and just sort of go through the thought process of that. Seeing that I've done that a few times on tutorials already, but doing it interactive seems like an interesting, something to try. So the few things that I want to try before we end the stream is looking through adding some of the new plugins that I've already loaded up in here and seeing what the differences are there, and then adding the background loading logic in that I wrote a little while ago. I've got a slightly improved version of that, and the idea eventually is that I want to get to a place where when this project starts, you can actually choose between two environments. So this environment, an indoor environment, and I want to have a much larger outdoor environment where we can start playing around with some weapons that are longer ranged. So that's the goal for tonight. So hopefully you guys enjoy going on. I'm using my index tonight, which is going to be very interesting, because one of the downsides, I love this thing. One of the downsides of this, I wear glasses, and it's a pain putting this on and off every time that you try something. But we'll manage. So I just want to get that one minimized. So when we look at our add-ons folder, we can see our OpenVR folder in there, and we now see our new Godot XR Tools folder in there. So we recently renamed that to Godot XR Tools. That probably falls under my camera, doesn't it? Let me just double check that. Yeah, I need to keep in mind that my camera is here, so let's move that up a little bit so that we can see that. That's going to be taking a little used to. So there's the latest version of XR Tools that I've got in here, and I've moved the resource queue in here, which is the resource queue file that you can download from the Godot documentation site. But I put it in add-ons, so I thought that was actually a nicer place, so that add-ons really is any source code that comes from third-party sources. But I don't have, like I have in a lot of my other projects, an asset library where I'm putting all my assets in. So that's also something that I slowly want to restructure here, to have that same approach that I've got with my latest tutorials, where I have this split between files that come from third parties, that I try to leave as unmodified as possible, and then the files that we have in our project ourselves, so that it becomes easier to update resources that you get from other people. What else do we need to talk about? So this is the new OpenVR with the new action interface, and it's just using the default actions file. For that, actually, I need to go into Atom for a second. I actually want to do a separate stream at some point to have a look at the. Let's see this. Okay. I'm looking at the wrong one. Haha. This one. Here we go. Actions. So I want to do a separate stream for all the OpenVR changes, but we'll have a quick look at this. Because we now have an actions file, this is something that OpenVR came up with, where you define all the actions that you can perform within your application, within your game. And then within the OpenVR interface, you can bind those to the different buttons on your controllers. And the nice thing about that is that these bindings can be different for all the different platforms, which means that if, like for instance, for the MR controllers for Microsoft, having both a touchpad and a joystick, you can decide whether you want to use the joystick or whether you want to use a touchpad instead of it just randomly picking one of the two. Or I think it gives priority over the touchpad, and when you create logic that really needs to be using the joystick, you're stuck. So that's something that really is very nice about this approach. The downside that I found with the actions approach, because it is so targeted at OpenVR, it's very hard to have a cross-platform implementation for that. So what I've done is when you use the default setup, which it uses automatically, we have sort of like this backwards compatible layer between the two, and we can add some stuff if we want to. We can start from scratch, but if we just begin like this, then we can use all the standard stuff, and it will just work, and it'll stay somewhat cross-platform. That if you want to support Quest, you can pretty much make a project that supports Quest without redesigning the whole UI basically. So that is in place. One of the nice things that that gives us is if we go into our hands, is that we can actually see, and I haven't actually moved those into place, but we have working hands now. We'll see those in action in a minute when we run this project. So that part of it I've already done before the stream started. I already made the OpenVR plugin work. Actually, let's start it up and see if everything is still running. Should be good. So I'm not going to put my headset on completely. Oh, this one's gone to sleep again. Come on, wake up. There we go. So you can see that we can actually move our fingers. We can move that one. This one gets tracked, which is pretty cool. Made the direct movement. I'm sitting down. This game was not designed to be used sitting down, but yeah, still works. Oh, I don't have the sound on for this, but yeah, that also works. So, all right, there we go. Perfect. All right, I hope you still are all with me because I'm not seeing anything happening in the chat. So, hope the stream's still running. Actually, double check that. Oh, look at that. What's actually going like that? So, the first part of rejigging that we need to do is to start moving everything that has to do with our origin point into a separate scene, and move some logic across to support that. So that's what I'm going to start with. So we're going to go save this branch, and I'm actually going to create a folder for that called player. And I'm just going to call this player scene. There we go. Cool. Hold on. That one. I'm not used to doing this live. And let's go and rename that. So remember to use the right keyboard. And create a script on that. We'll work on that in minutes. I want to actually rename this to player as well. It's going to break a few things, but we'll work through those. So we have a bunch of things that currently are happening on our main scripts that we want to go and move into our subscripts. The other thing that I'm just reading through this is that we wanted that cooldown finished. We want to link that up again. So that is on this guy. No, it's not on that guy. I thought it was on this guy. Nope. Close a little bit too much there. Is it on this one? Where is that coming from? I'm wondering if we're missing something, if we've lost something. Your common shader. So that's a common shader cache. That no longer gives a signal. Wow. I think I've lost something. So that's interesting. We never added that into our XR common. That's interesting. I'm going to make a remark of that. That's then something that we can't make work today. But that's okay. We're going to just move that into our player script. This means that our hiccup will stay for our gun trail effects. So I am going to go and comment this out. And we are going to go and just remove that because that is now, we're in that script here now. So that is AR via camera, VR common shader cache, and then particles. That reminds me, we also need our OpenVR shader cache in here. Let's see, OpenVR shader cache. Completely forgot about that one. There we go. I'll leave a remark here. And then the same for this one. We'll just disable that for now. Just leave a remark that we need to do that. Have I tried the HoloLens 2? No, I have not. I really wish I could get my hands on one of those. It's one of the downsides of being in Australia. We are away from a lot of those sort of fun things, and yeah, I really wish I knew someone who had one so I can. I haven't even tried out the HoloLens 1. I will be trying out the Nreal glasses soon. A friend of mine is getting the Nreal glasses, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm playing around with it. Godot support for HoloLens is something that has been discussed that we really want to do. We tried getting somewhere with the HoloLens 1. The biggest problem that we ran into is that the HoloLens 1 runs a version of Windows, like a stripped down version of Windows, that requires you to run universal Windows platform applications, which Godot does, but it only supports DirectX. And the OpenGL enhancements that they did to support the HoloLens, to support stereo rendering, they didn't maintain them. We couldn't get them to work. It was really annoying. From what I understand, HoloLens 2 is OpenXR based, but whether that is OpenXR only with DirectX, don't know. I don't have enough info on the HoloLens 2 for that, but that was our main problem. That was the main reason why we couldn't get that to work. Anyway, let's continue with this. This last bit is going to be a problem right now, is that we are setting our viewport texture of our viewport VR in here. So that actually needs to go back to our main scene. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the ready function in the root node will run last. So this should run after our after that all is run. Now the other problem that we right now have is that the viewport is in our main scene, so we actually need to go and give that access. So I'm going to make a extern viewports var render viewports. There we go. What export, not extern. You mix up my languages. Okay, so let's save that, and then back in our main scene, we are going to go in here. That probably needs to reload. No, it does not. Why is that not coming up just yet? Export hint isn't a resource type. That should work. What am I doing wrong here? Ah, it's nothing. Oh, that needs to be an OPAF. OPAF. That's right. So here we're going to do for our viewport is no. We're going to do if render viewports. Then we're going to get node render viewports. If not viewports, we're just going to use the main viewport. Should never be true, but just in case we make a mistake. So now we can update our size. So for those who are not aware, the AR/VR interface will resize our viewport automatically within the render engine, but it can't communicate that size back to the node. And as a result, the node's viewport size is unknown. And when that is unknown, our proxy texture doesn't work when we are then using this viewport as the display in our viewport UI. The other thing that we need to change here is, and I'm actually going to remove this, is that this version of the plugin supports proper output. Oh, we have to change that as well. Where are we? Rendering. We have to keep linear needs to be on as well. Linear. Viewport.keep 3D linear. That one needs to be true. We could take the tick boxes over here, but I like to kind of do this in code once we know that the HMD is active. Doesn't really matter that much. Oh, that's the other one as well. I still can't believe how long we got that wrong, that we set the wrong one there. I'm going to leave that at 90, even though in my last tutorial I was talking about setting this much higher when you have small objects within your physics engine. But I'm going to leave this at 90 here because our objects that we're working with right now are large enough. And I actually want to go down a different path with the bullets that we are going to be implementing in my next tutorial. And I want to experiment with that. So we'll have a look. So yeah, I was talking about the get render target size. So it is being set in the background by the AR/VR interface that overrides the viewport size. The other thing is And I'm surprised that this wasn't a problem, so I must be doing something more here, or maybe that's because I do initialize that here. But if your size is here, well, that's actually a good one. No, we're going to leave that 0 because that means that we don't get, a viewport of 10 allocated. If you don't do this and you leave that 0, that also means that things don't get initialized properly. That's a bug a lot of people have run into. But it's because the internal render engine in Godot will skip any viewport that doesn't have a size because it assumes that a viewport hasn't been set up yet. And in our case, because we're getting the size from our HMD, from our VR SDK, we don't have it yet. But seeing that we're doing this, it will actually mean that the moment that we set the viewport here, on the next frame that we render, it will initialize all the buffers correctly. So it's actually a nice extra thing about this. But in the end, the AOVR server does not feed it back into the viewport that we're using. And as a result, if we don't set this, then our viewport here doesn't work. And the other thing that we now have done is we've tried to keep 3D linear on. That means that Godot will not do the linear to sRGB conversion in this viewport. It will leave it in the linear color space. This is because OpenVR expects the color buffer to be in linear color space. But that also means that we're now rendering out a viewport in linear color space over here, and we will see a darker image on screen. So when we test this in a minute, we will see that the scene looks darker. I have a bit of code, but I need to see if I've actually got it on this computer that you can implement in a shader that will do the sRGB conversion in a shader and bring the color back to how it should look like on screen. In the headset, it looks perfect. And that's what's most important. So we're playing in the headset. So yeah, be aware of that. A lot of people go wrong with that. Especially OpenVR has been a bit of a nightmare when it comes to working with different color spaces. So I think that does everything here. The only thing that we now still need to do is now we can indeed assign our render viewport. So we assign that guy to it. So now our player knows which viewport it is rendering to, even though the viewport is outside of our subscene. And that's a nice way to set that up. Cool. All right. Let's test and see if we still have a working system. So here you can see that this now looks a lot darker than it did the last time we ran it. But in the headset, can I do that? I have no idea if that works. That probably doesn't work. Let me see. Well, let's see if I can. Where's my camera actually on this thing? It's over here. No, that doesn't work. Oh, it was worth a try. It was worth a try. It was worth a try. But yeah, it looks correct inside. Everything else still works, I think. Let me double check. Yeah, the color is still perfectly good in here. Of course, my controller is off again. There we go. Come on. Boot back up. There we go. So yeah, we can still move around and do our thing. Very good. Alrighty. Got it. Sweet. Very. Okie dokie. That looks the way that it's supposed to. Oh, let me go back so I can see my chats. Hope you guys are all still with me. All right. So the next part that I want to start working on is making our scene loading work, and for that we're just going to start moving everything into some base scenes. So let's go and have a look at our old background loading projects, where we have in the scenes we have our base scene here from which we're going to inherit, and then we have the different scenes that we have. And obviously one of our scenes is going to be our loading scene here, which we then need to rebuild. I think that's going to work fine. So let's have a look. Let's also have a look at how that's set up here. Yeah, we Valve was nice enough to donate some Index hardware. I'm really happy with that. So, I've got all the other headsets around here as well. But today, yeah, we are working with the Index and having some fun with that. Let's have a look. I should really run a second copy of Godot and have this open in that, I think. But yeah. Let's actually start putting some stuff in here that we need. No. I don't have my effects version in here yet. Okay. Well, assets, tools, add-ons. This one's not on the right branch. Okay. Need to remember to. My keyboard on my laptop is a bit sticky, so I'm using an external keyboard. Keep forgetting to actually use it. What was it called? My Godot assets. There we go. Get status. Where are we on? We are on master, and I shouldn't get. I shouldn't be on master. What did I call that branch? I have no idea. I have to have a look at. I don't have a browser window open. GitHub. Godot VR. Godot XR Tools. And oh, that's on my personal one. That's why. You can see that I haven't used this laptop that much yet. This is a pretty. Oh, I only reinstalled it the other day, so. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So I did set that up. Add effects. Hit. Check out. Version. And effects. Is that it? Oh, I just forget the -B. That wasn't behind mine. Mix up my Git commands. Learn to type as. Yeah, no, because we created that by accident. Okay, so let's go back to check out that. -B add effects. Is that what I needed to do? That's what I need to do. Alright. Now I have my new effects folder. I'm not merging this into the master yet because there's a couple of other effects that I want to add before I do that. But I do want to be able to use that in here. So we're just going to go and copy that in there so that we have it. Alrighty. And that adds our fade to black that we created for our background loading tutorial in there. So we have that in there right now. Is faded should be transparent. You're welcome, Ronnie. First stream, it's pretty new, so I hope you guys are enjoying yourself. All right, so we have that one. I'm gonna go and create a placeholder spatial for our. That needs to be on that level for our loading node. So we're going to go and save that. We are going to create a new folder for scenes. I'm going to go and create a new folder for loading, and we're going to go and put that in there. I'm probably going to steal that from our background loading one as well, because we don't nicely have our Godot logo in there. Let's add another spatial to this. No, not to you. This. We call that our world. So that's what are going to be our anchor point for loading our world into. And now I'm going to go and make a spatial here, which is going to become our shooting range. And we're going to go start moving everything that we have underneath that. Boom. All right. Now this is going to be interesting because can we? Can we retrofit that as an inherited scene later on? That'll. We might have to edit some files in the background. That'll be an interesting little experiment. So we have all our elements in place. Now the first thing that I want to do is make sure that everything still works, or if we've broken everything. Let's see. Fade to black is on. And that is the right default, but don't want that for testing right now. That's better. All right. Hey, didn't go sleeping this time. So yeah, everything's still working. Cool. Alrighty. Perfect. So let's go and save this branch in here. Create a new folder. I'm call that shooting range. We're gonna save that guy in there, and we'll park that for later. Because that's the bit that we are actually not going to have loaded in here anymore, but we're going to change that out. Actually, a good point. We're going to go and get rid of that already. So, yeah, sad, bye-bye. We'll have to deal with that in a minute. I want to concentrate on our loading scene first. So let's go and save this. Let's close that, let's close that, let's close that. Alrighty. So, and the reason that I'm closing this is because I'm going to be copying a couple of stuff in, and I want to make sure that we don't get stuff stuck in memory. So in our scenes, in our loading, we now have our loading scene here, and we are going to steal that from our background loading tutorial. Now I need to get some assets in, so let's put those in place first. So obviously, we'll start moving more things into that folder later on, but for now, I want to go and get these two. So let's just copy them both. Have a look at that. So I don't want that one because that is specific for our background loading, but here is our splash screen that we based on our little Godot logo. And that is the one that is going to be coming from our loading screen here. So scenes, loading. All right, we're gonna have to rename that. So let's go get rid of that U. And now we're gonna rename U to loading. Boom. All right. Here we go. Okay, so if we now go back to main. Yep, let's start our main scene. Boom. When we go to our loading scene, we have our far point not far enough. There we go. We have our Godot logo very far. Now, in our background loading scene, the background here needs to be black. And in our original background tutorial, what I did was I made the default environment black, and then I added a world environment into our in all our scenes to get the background correct there. But that means that whenever we are working the sub scenes, we have this black background. You can't see anything. So I want to do a different approach here. That makes it easier to deal with these things. And the approach that we're going to take here is that our default environment is just going to be our beautiful default Godot environment that we don't really want to have. But that's the one that we're going to use by default. And then we're going to make it possible to override that in each scene that we're loading. Starting with our loading scene, And for that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to create a script on our loading scene. And all we're going to have on our script here, export, environment, or environment. And I'm going to define that it's null over here, but we're going to create a environment on this guy. New environment, boom. Now you notice that nothing is changing right now because this environment isn't being loaded into Godot right now. So it's not actually using this. We are going to be switching that in our main scene when we switch between the loading scene and the actual scene that we've loaded. So yeah, we'll get back to that. So I just want a custom color. I want it to be black so that our whole background is black, and I don't really care about any of the other settings right now. I just want to have a black background behind our Godot logo. And that will be the loading scene that we and we'll do something more fun with this loading scene later on. But for now, that is all that needs to that one needs to be. We have our Godot logo in here still. That also means that we are going to have a world environment in here. Boom. And we're going to load that up with our default environment. There we go. And that's the one that we're going to end up switching. All right, so time to start rejigging that. So for that, we're going to create a new scene. It's going to become a 3D scene. That's going to be our base scene, base world, whatever we want to call it. We're going to go save that in our scenes. There we go, our base scene. Add a script to that. And keep going. Let's remove that all. And we will start implementing that in a minute. We deleted that, so that's good. So now I'm going to have a look again at how that's set up in this. So we can actually fix up this stuff. So this is one thing that I don't think, unless someone can correct me, but I don't think we can actually do this within Godot itself. You know, when you have an existing scene that you now want to change that it inherits from another scene, I don't think we can change that in hindsight. But we will have a look and see if we can work that out. So, no, not up player. That actually all needs to move around soon. So that's our shooting range. So this one we actually want to inherit from our base scenes. So we have a base scene as a external resource here, which obviously we will need to get and put in. I don't think it matters really that we're putting this in late and giving this a new ID. I don't think so. Let's see. But now, this is sub-resource 1. So now we need to. Where does it say that we're actually inheriting from here? Node name scene instance is that. So let's see if we're going to be screwing this up or if this will actually work. So here we have our node name shooting range, and we have here type spatial, and here it's instance. All right, so let's go and overwrite this. But now it's going to become instance 8. I'm going to save that, and let's see if it still loads or if we broke it. Very possible that we just broke the whole thing. Okay, that is easy to fix because we just have the name wrong. Haha. That's looking promising. Okay, open. And there we go. We got our shooting range, but it is now inheriting from our base scene. Now we can prove that because I'm just going to put a test node in here. Boom. There we go. And if we now open up our shooting range, we have our test node there. So that's how we fix up having that that inherit from us. Now with scripts, it's easier because we obviously have our script over here. We have another script over here. Why is that not open? Oh, okay. Look at that. We actually hadn't created a script on the shooting range yet, which is perfect. So, I'm happy with that. We're going to keep it that way. So, That's out in here, so I'm just going to have a peek in here. That's the sort of things that we did here. Because we need to go and start implementing a lot of these things. I think the only thing that we have here, yeah, here we had the world environment. That's something that we're going to change how that works right now. But we do want this one. We want our player spawn point in here. So we're going to just rename that to our player spawn. There we go. This is going to be a spatial node that we use so that in our base scene here, well, in our shooting range here, when we go and look and we find our spawn point, we see that now the middle of our shooting range, that's where our spawn point is. So if we hadn't done anything with our background loading logic that we are now taking from the background loading tutorial, that's where our player would start. And that's not where we want him. So all we need to do right now is just move this guy into the area that we do want the player to start, so that when this guy loads in, that is where we're going to position our player. Right now I'm going to leave the orientation by default, but we might even play around with the orientation at some point to make sure that our player always faces the right way. The big problem that I've always had with OpenVR, and especially with the setup here with the index, is OpenVR seems to change the direction that it thinks is your starting direction, which is really annoying. So sometimes I'm nicely facing this way towards my computer, and that is then forward as far as the game is concerned. Sometimes suddenly I'm just having everything at the back of me. So we'll live with it, and we might do some improvements for that at some point in time, and just have a look at, okay, whatever direction the player is currently facing, that is the direction that we're going to use as the forward direction. Hopefully that'll work. Might actually have built it that way. Can't entirely remember how we did that originally. So let's go and re-implement some of the stuff that we have over here. I'm going to make some slight changes to the way this works. I might actually go and have a look at this guy over here. This is just a private project of me that I'm working on. But I improved a few things here. So I'm actually going to go and we're just going to go and steal a few things from here. And I'll explain what this all does once we start working with it. So we define a signal in our base scene, so that we can call back into our parent to say, go and load a new scene. So, and that's a signal that we're going to hook up in code. So that's something that we'll be working with. We have our environment here. It's the same way as with loading. So in loading, we have loaded our environment here with our black environment. Here we're going to go and set our environment to our default environment, or if we want a specific environment for our level, we load that environment. And then we have a variable whether in this scene we want to enable movement. So this is from in the loading screen. I don't want the player to be able to teleport around, and I don't want them to be able to use a joystick to do direct movement. So that's something that we turn off there. But in our shooting range, we want to turn that on. So that's something that we want to be able to set from one scene to another, and whatever scene is loaded dictates whether our controls are on or off, which is something we're going to have to implement in. And the same thing for pointers. So I don't think we actually have our pointers yet. No, we don't. And we actually also got to do pickup. We're going to go and add that in a minute as well. Let me get a little drink. Getting a bit of a dry throat there. All right. So let's go and get our pointer scenes. So we're going to have a pointer on our left hand. And these are laser pointers, so that if you point your controller at something, you can choose something on a display or things like that. And we're going to use that in the selection screen. So those two need to be there. We're going to do that through code in a minute, so we'll leave these all up. But the collision mask needs to change. So we're going to go into project settings. We're going to go and have a look at our... Oh, look at that. We haven't even set up our... No, we physics. Looking at the wrong one. So I've got all the things that are for the player. I've got that in our player layer, environment, objects. We might eventually add more things in here. In this case, our layer 3, our objects layer, are always objects that we can pick up. And in some of the other projects, I split that out into objects that just, are rigid bodies. You can knock them over and do stuff with it, but you can't pick them up. And then the objects that you can pick up. And we have a, this is the other thing that I now do. The first 10 layers I use for things that we interact with in the world. And the layer 10 to 11 to 20. So the last 10 layers I'm using for things that are no longer part of the world. So if I pick something up, like I pick up the gun or I pick up the magazine, I change it to one of these layers. And that means it no longer can collide with the player, for instance, because that was one of the problems that I had. Was you pick up the gun, now you're colliding with the gun, and the gun is actually pushing you away, which is not a good thing. So that's why we put those things in these layers. So the same thing here with our UI. So we're going to make that layer 12. All our UI things, the things that the pointers can interact with, we're going to put into a layer that isn't colliding with the player, so that we can't go and collide with the UI. We might eventually do some more with that once we are able to hide our controllers when we don't want to use them. We might even hide them completely now that we have our hands that we're using. That's something that we need to play around with as well. But that we can actually touch things with our fingers. It's something that we might experiment with. I actually want to do that in our object interaction tutorials. So something that's going to come pretty soon. Touch things with your fingers. So we're setting that layer up now. I haven't found a way yet to make these collision masks actually work like like the normal built-in collision masks. So here you nicely have those layers that pop up. There doesn't seem to be a hint to do that, unless they added to it, and I don't know what it is yet. But unfortunately, that means that we're going to have to untake them all manually, and that we don't know which ones it is. But we used layer 12. So our layer 12 is what our pointers are going to be interacting with. There's a whole lot of code more that we need to add in here. But yeah, that sets up our pointers. Alrighty, hour of time, 11 o'clock. Oh, we'll keep going for a bit longer. Alright, so I'm gonna close you for a minute. We'll reopen that in a minute as well. I want to go and make sure that our default environment is our default environment, but that's the one that we're going to be using for our shooting range as well. But for our outdoor environment, we're going to change it. So, okay. The other thing that we, of course, want to do is enable pickup. I want to add that in as well. And we can see that we're going to be passing through the player node once we initialize our world. That code doesn't exist yet, but I am going to go and put this all in there. So we do that. So our three functions that we currently have on our VR player, being able to move around, being able to pick up stuff, and being able to point at stuff, those three we can turn on and off as our new scene loads into our world. Yes, you do. Finger positions. I'll quickly show that by showing what this scene looks like. So this is actually a hand that a model that comes. That comes with the SDK. So this is a model that OpenVR supplies to everybody. It's part of the OpenVR installation package. It's completely rigged, so there's a complete skeleton here. So you'll see that is completely, that's all imported from a GLTF file. But you can see that I have created these nodes called bone attachment nodes. That's a node in Godot where you can identify one of the fingers, one of the bones in your skeleton, and you can make this thing follow the finger. It's actually, we'll run a quick test. Let's see if our project still starts, because I don't think we're calling our world load info yet. So yeah, we've got nothing left. Should be Not even a Godot logo. Not even a Godot. Oh, he must have been hiding now. We do see our pointer pointing out now. So let's have some fun. Let's go into our main scene. We're gonna go and turn editable children on here so we can do something. And then we're gonna go to this guy and editable children. And let's go to our index finger, and we're going to stop holding that for a minute. Let's put a mesh instance on this. Boom. And let's do a sphere. Just a little bit smaller than that. Let's make it 10. It might still be way too big. That is way too big. Make it a bit smaller. There we go. That is on the tip of our index finger. Boom. There's one other thing that I want to do while we're at. We're going to turn this off. We're going to not show our controllers. Now that we have our hands, why would we be showing our controllers? There's no point. So let's turn that off. We can actually change that back to normal AR VR controller modes. We might change that over in a minute. But of course I did it on my left hand, didn't I? Yep. I put it on my left hand. Other controller. Come on, load up. There we go. Hey. So I have to have this working a bit. Let's see. So now you can see that is nicely following our finger. So yeah, the fingers are completely articulated, and we can follow our things. And I've already been running experiments with it, putting collision shapes on the tips of the fingers, and then pushing stuff around and grabbing stuff. Grabbing stuff is a problem, but that's again something that I want to start talking about in the interaction videos, and start looking at ways to solve those. So we're gonna go delete that, and we're gonna go get rid of our editable children. So it's gonna say you're gonna lose all that. That's good. I want to go reload our main scene. My experience is that often when you do that sort of stuff, there's always something left over from all the playing around. So sometimes it's just best to just reload a scene. Can we just move that to the start? Yes, we can. But I do want. Actually, let's have a look. Is there anything special in the code here that we want to keep? That is going from our over here. Controller. What am I doing here? I'm doing show controller. I'm loading our render models. Do I do anything with the signals? None of these are hooked up. I think we don't care. All right. That means it is going to be bye-bye. Actually, one of the things that we could even do is we could even put these onto these guys if we wanted to, but it might be a little bit too hastily done. Where was he? Did I do something about? Yeah, I did make it visible. That's something that we might wanna keep. That is something we might want to keep. All right, we'll create our own little script for that. I still want to go for an AR/VR controller. AR/VR controller. Oh. So I'll put that over here. You're going to go there. You're going to go there. You're going to go there. This guy is 1. That guy is 1. Very good. If anything gets screwed up, no, it looks all fine. Sometimes it resets settings on this thing, so I always need to check if it's all still good. All right. So let's copy that. We can go get rid. Go away. Get rid of that. Put that there. So now, because we have our hand models, we're no longer going to be using our AR/VR hands or our controller models, because that's just double up. We are going to have to do some funny things with positioning our guns better and stuff like that, but we'll eventually deal with that. And I'm probably going to research at some point making these children of our left hand, but I want to be a little bit careful with that, because there's some functionality in these functions that assume that we are a child of an AR/VR controller and not of these. This is actually this is all controlled by a new script on our plugin. So this is a VR pose object, and that follows a pose that we've defined in our action, and we can configure in OpenVR what part of the controller we're following there. So in this case, that needs to follow the left hand position, which then again is positioned different on each controller for each platform. So it's in a different place, in a different orientation on an Oculus Touch controller, or on an Index controller, or on a Vive wand, or on a MR controller. It'll be in the right position for the hand to actually grab the handle, so that regardless of which of those platforms we are on, which of those controllers we are using, the hand will always nicely grab the controller in its correct position, which is really, really cool. And there's a bunch of other positions on the controller that is being tracked. So the position, if you look at the controller like this, so we have a point for the bottom here, and we have a point for the tip. I think there's a point for where these grip buttons are, so that you can react to what you're gripping. So yeah, there's quite a few points that we can now track with these VR pose objects. It's actually pretty cool. But yeah, like I said in my introduction, like I said in the beginning, it does mean that when you start using that stuff, you are tying yourself in fully to the OpenVR platform. If you then want to port your game to the Oculus Quest or to the Oculus Rift, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to have to do something and to replace that functionality with, because on those platforms that doesn't exist. OpenXR does, by the way. OpenXR has got a similar action system. I haven't played with it yet, but that is definitely going to be interesting to research. Did we just choose the wrong one? All right. So yeah, I really need to get into OpenXR. I really need to have a look at OpenXR. Too many things to look at. So let's get rid of that guy. Bye-bye. There we go. Boom, boom. All right, left hand, right hand. That needs to be 2. That's not going to work. And then the last thing that I want to do is we want to create a script on these guys. But we're not going to call that left hand. We're just going to call that controller. Create. Really should change my default settings there. And all that I want to do is I want to make sure that these things are hidden to begin with. And we make them visible in process. Okay. Visible. Yeah, if the controller is not active, we make it invisible. If we're already visible, we're fine. And if we can become visible for the first time, let's leave that signal in there as well. I don't think we'll be using it. But, there you go. We might use it to actually turn the hand on and off at some point. Because right now, if you don't have the controllers on, the hands are lying on the floor. We'll deal with that in some time. Okay. Hello, Eduardo. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. All right. That's all set up now. We've gotten rid of our controllers because we now have our hands, so we don't actually need the controls anymore. We were working on our base scene, so we've got that all set up. All right. Let's go and have a look at our player script. So right now we have our ready function in here that turns out viewport stuff on and our interface on. We disabled that. We're going to come back to that once I add some missing logic back into our XR tools. Still shocked we lost that one. So let's have a look at my other project and have a look at what I'm doing here. There we go. And we really want to do our own version of this. I'm going to copy a little bit over of this, but I'm going to run through this code a little bit because it is interesting to follow. So I'm going to add that over here. So these are going to be properties not for us to manually set, but so that we have access to them. So we're going to do pickup. So these three properties that we add to our player script, so they're going to be on our roots. Might help with a save first. Save. Do I need to reload that one? What is it? Oh, because I haven't implemented them yet. That's why it's not. Okay, let's implement them first. I always like to have my variables on top and my functions later on. So what we're going to be doing here is func. Let's just have a quick. Oh, that's the other thing. I am starting to use, very inconsistently, but I am starting to use TypeScript. There are times when duck typing is really nice, but if you can clarify what a variable type is, I think you always should it. If only because you're documenting what you're doing. So if someone uses your code later on, they know what you're trying to do. We want to have this one as well. So this is another thing that I've done in my background loading script as well. Is we either have our left pointer on or our right pointer on. So whatever controller you use last, that's the one that has the pointer that works. You see that in Beat Saber, for instance. They do that as well. So enable movement. So we're just going to copy this. Is enabled. And then we are going to go and enable or disable the relevant function. So in this case, it's going to be teleport enabled. Oh, that's right. First, check if it actually exists. Because these are properties, this is something that took me a long time to figure this out before I figured out where certain errors were coming from. When your scene instantiates, your properties are set first. And that means that if you have setting methods, setters, they get called, even though the scene hasn't actually instantiated yet. So the very first time that this function runs to get the default values applied, these nodes don't exist yet. So if I would just be calling enabled without checking whether the teleport function is actually instantiated, is actually available, our code will break. We will get a nice error, and that will be the end of it. So that is why I'm doing that. So on our left hand, we enable or disable our teleport function, and on our right hand, we're going to go and enable or disable our direct movement. All right. Now, that also means that the very first time this gets called, we are going to assign our variable, but we're not going to run through the code. So we're not actually enabling or disabling our actual teleport and direct movement nodes. So that is why we always repeat this at the end of our ready function. Enable movements is enable movements. So even though we just ran it, but because we skipped part of it, we're now going to run it again, just assign the value to itself. And at this point in time, our nodes are instantiated, and then we get our default values applied. So that's why you always see me do a repeat of that logic. So let's do pickup next. Sets, enable pickup, enables bool, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to set our enable pickup to enable so that we remember what our setting is. And then we check on our left hand. Do we have our, oh, I just scrolled right over it. Do we have our pickup function? And if we do, why does that not autocomplete? Ooh. Okay. Our pickup function does not have a does not have an enable. So I'm going to comment that code out, and we're going to implement that later on. Another one to remember. I thought I did that, but I must have not checked that in. So let's complete the code, but then comment it out. So we're going to do the same thing for the right hand. Pick up. Right hand. Pick up. There we go. We're going to comment that out in a minute, but the other thing that I want to have a look at is we can safely call drop object, because the other thing that we want to do is, let's say that we're in a scene, we're holding our gun, it's in our hand. That means that our gun is now childed to our main scene. Now we actually need to drop that before we even unload the scene, so this is probably already too late. So no, we're not going to do that here. We're going to do that in another place, because remember, we're going to exit the gun range and switch to a selection screen. Go from the selection screen to the gun range, go back, go from the selection screen to the other range that we're going to build, go back. As we're doing that sort of thing, if we're still holding a gun, we suddenly bring the gun into our selection screen. It doesn't really make sense. But this is the wrong place to do that. So I'm just going to, not quite sure why my caps lock is on. That's why. So I'm going to comment this out because we haven't implemented that yet. And I make exactly the same mistake because I've got my fingers in it. And let's make a comment here and say need to implement enabled on our pickup function tools. So yeah, I obviously need to have implement that on our upstream thing. Now we do the pointer, and that's going to be slightly different. So, excuse me, func set enabled pointer enabled full enable pointer is enabled. Oh, the other thing that we forgot is we want to do this again. And let's put this one in here as well while we're here. There we go. All right. So here we want to do if left hand pointer. We're going to say left hand pointer dot enabled is enabled, and pointer on hand is 0. So only when our pointers, actually I'm going to zoom this out a little bit. I keep forgetting to do that. And the other thing that I wanted to change, I should have done this at the start, so sorry about that. I started doing this in my tutorial videos as well, because that blows it a bit up, makes it a bit more readable for everybody, but also we have all this space now, so let's see a little bit more what we do. So now we're going to enable the left hand pointer if our pointers should be enabled, and if we currently have our left hand pointer enabled. This time I'm going to be lazy, and I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to say right I'm going to say right. And that obviously needs to only be enabled if our right hand pointer is enabled. All right. Let's cheat again and have a look at the other thing that I need to do here. We're going to copy that. Actually, we'll do that right away. And I actually made a mistake when I did my original background loading tutorial. We actually used global transform here, which meant that the whole thing didn't work. You have to use the local transform of the camera here. So this is the code that we're going to need to call in a minute to actually position the player on our spawn point. And it will actually take into account our current location and our current direction of looking of our camera to make sure that wherever I'm standing in my room, I will now be centered on that spawn point and indeed looking in the direction that we have defined that that person should be looking when that that scene loads. So that's what the spawn point does. Okie dokie. So that's what it's good. That is explained in my background loading video if you want to know a little bit more about it. But I'm just pasting that in. So those two we've done, and now we're going to go and re-implement those two. For that I have to make that smaller again for a minute. So on our pointer, if we are clicking, we're going to connect that signal up to our main script. We're going to do the same for our right hand pointer. Oh, wait a second. That wasn't smart, so let's undo that. I have made this mistake before. Let's go and remove that code. And now let's hook that up again, but let's give it a name. And this is going to be our left pointer pressed. There we go. And now we do the same with this one. And that's going to be our right pointer pressed. And again, I'm just going to go and copy this in here. Boom. But we need to go and change this. Why is that? Oh, right. Our active button is our VR. That I'm making sure that I'm reacting on the same button. I was wondering why is it active? Let's zoom that out again. We also need to make sure that this is the correct left hand pointer. There we go. And I'm going to copy that for the other one. So what we're doing here is when our button is pressed on our left controller, and this obviously needs to be the opposite on our right controller, and the button that was pressed is our function pointer, so the trigger pointer that we've made the pointer function working with, and our pointer is enabled, and we're currently on the other hand, we switch. We change the pointer to 0, and we call the set enable pointer again, which will then apply that logic, making sure that our previous pointer is turned off and our new pointer is turned on. So that should, I think, be everything that we need to have in here. Now, why is this complaining? Set enable pointer. Set of function isn't defined. What's over here? Why is it complaining about that? Because there's a D in there. Okay. There we go. Ah. Make small mistakes. Yeah, let's go and make sure that our loading logic is in place, and then we call it a day, I think, for the stream. So yeah, that should be good now. All right. So have a look at our environment again. All right, so I'm going to hide that by default. I want our fade to black to be on again, so we start and fade it in. And now we need to start building the logic in here that actually shows our worlds. Now, I've prepared all that in here, and we're going to go and start using it. Just remember, there's one more thing that we forgot to do. We have to auto-load our resource queue, and that needs to be called resource queue. That's a mistake that I made last time as well. Resource queue, and there we go. So that makes sure that that script is loaded when we start. That one can go and don't save. I'm not sure. I think we moved that. Now I'm not going to write all the code that I've got here. I'm just going to copy and paste the important bits out of. Else we'll be sitting here tomorrow still. But I am going to go through this code with you guys because I've radically changed it, or better said, simplified it, compared to how it was in our. Oh, that's what I've done differently in my current one. Okay, good. Because I've done this quite, I simplified this a lot from how I did it with the in the background loading video, because there I was working through the different stages, and then I think it was Game Endeavor who did a video about using yield to just have pause points in your code. So basically where the code stops running and you wait for a certain condition to finish, and then the code continues running, which is really cool. So I rewrote it to this, and it's just cleaned up this code quite a lot. And we'll go through how that works in a minute. But we are obviously going to load a different scene here. Unfortunately, I do need to go here now. Where is our shooting range? Here's our shooting range, and we just drag that into our code. Boom. That way we don't have to type the whole bloody thing. So we are going to load up our shooting range now, but through our background loading. So we're going to see our loading screen first, then we're going to trigger loading our new scene, and then once our new scene is loaded, we're going to fade that in and switch over to it. And then probably in the next part, maybe over the weekend, I'm not quite sure yet, we're going to add in a selection screen and load that first, and then from the selection screen we're going to go to our shooting range or to the new environment that I want to add in here. So we're going to leave that in there, we're going to leave that in there, and then we're going to call our do load, and that is our function here. So we've got a variable here that keeps track of the current world that is loaded. So we're always going to load our world and then make it a subscene of this node, but I'm keeping a variable with that instance so that it's easy to access. Just convenience. So we're passing the scene that we're loading into here. I'm actually immediately starting to load the scene in the background. We're going to go and fade the screen to black. Now, in our startup, the very first time this runs, our screen is already black. So this basically immediately reacts to a signal finish fading being sent back to it. So we immediately go here. At this point in time, we're going to first remove the world that we currently have. We don't have one right now, but if we had one, if we went from one scene to another, we need to unload the scene first. So we are hiding our world scene node. So let's make sure that the name of that is actually correct. Let's rename this to world scene so we don't have to edit that a whole bunch of times in our script. So we're going to make that node invisible. That hides our currently loaded scene. We've faded our screen to black, so we're not seeing anything anyway. If we then have a current world loaded, so again, the first time we skipped this, but if we have one loaded, we're going to call exit world. So that is a function on our base scene here, exit world. Exit world. So this currently doesn't have any code here, but we should be adding some code in here. But the real code is actually going to be on our scenes itself, where we want to do any sort of cleanup before the world disappears. Like, for instance, dropping our gun, if we picked up a gun in our shooting range. That's one of the things that we're going to be implementing there in the near future. All right. Then we're going to disconnect the signal change rule. Remember, on our base scene, we created this change rule signal so that our current scene that we've loaded can communicate back to our main environment. Hey, I want you to load something different. So this is, I'm in the selection screen. I've clicked on the shooting range. That click is going to communicate back to our main scene. Hey, go and load up this one now. Go and load up this shooting scene. The same thing with our shooting scene. I'm thinking about the door that we have on the side. Maybe make that an exit. If you interact with that door, that's the signal that we want to unload our shooting range. We want to return back to our selection screen. So that is why it is important that that change rule signal exists in our base scene that we build all our scenes from, so that we can have that interaction from our currently loaded scene and our container scene, our main scene. All right, so that is why we are disconnecting them. Once that is done, our current world is basically in a state where it no longer does anything, so we can remove it from our world scene. And then we call Q-free. We don't free it right away in this case because there are still some cleanup things that Godot is doing in the background and that hasn't finished yet. So if we would free it right away, that would cause all sorts of problems. We Q-free it, and that means that our current event loop can finish. And when everything's finished and Godot has finished its, that loop of the frame, that's when it clears up any objects that have been marked off as needing to be cleared. And we set our current world to null to indicate that this pointer, current world pointer, is no longer valid. We are no longer working. Then on our player, and this actually needs to enhance because we want to disable movements, and we want to disable our. I've got my. I've got my insert button on, as per usual. Our pointer and our pickup. We're going to now fade in our loading screen. So we want to make sure that we can't move while we're in our loading screen. We can't pick something up. There's nothing to pick up, so it really doesn't matter. And our pointers are disabled. We don't want to go pointing around our little Godot logo. Why am I getting a notification on my phone? That's fun. And then we're calling our position player function. Remember, that's that function that makes sure that we are positioned on our spawn point. But in this case, we are going to send it a default transform, which basically means we're going to position our player in the middle of our world at our origin point. And again, the important thing of this logic is, even if my AR/VR origin is, let's say, in the middle of my room behind me, I'm much more forward. I'm right now sitting in my chair. I'm not standing above the origin point of my, the center of my play space. That this takes that into account because it uses the current camera position to place the AR/VR point in such a way that the camera is at that center point, at that point of that transform indicates. And it also means that, when I enter my spawn point, it's not the AR/VR origin that will be on the spawn point with me maybe standing a meter forward straight through a wall. No, I'm being positioned right on that spawn point. That's what is so important of that logic that we've got there. And then we can see that we are using our world environment node. That one, we have named that the same, that's good. And we are going to go and assign that with our loading screen environment. Now here I need to check if we actually named that the same. So I'm going to rename that as well. Just make our life easy. Script. Keep clicking on the things in the wrong order. So we are going to make sure that whatever environment we've configured in our loading screen now becomes the environment. Remember, we have configured our black environment there. So that's going to make sure that our black environment is the thing that is current. And finally, we're going to make our loading screen visible. So that was invisible to begin with, which I think is probably something that we should make sure is indeed invisible at the start. So that doesn't become visible until we're ready to see our loading screen. We've centered our player. We've disabled our movements, we've disabled our pointers. We're now ready to show our loading screen. Our screen is still faded to black, so we're basically still all black. We're still not seeing anything, we've prepared everything. So our next step is we're going to turn fade to black to false. That's going to trigger our screen to fade slowly back to visible. And after that's finished, again, our yield is going to say wait until it's finished fading. Wait at this point. Once it's finished fading, we're going to go and do the next thing. Now we're seeing our loading screen, you know, a little Godot logo in a little bit further on. Now we're going to check if our resource queue has actually loaded our scene. And the way that we do that is simply try and obtain the resource that at the beginning here we've queued. If it's not yet loaded, it's still loading that in the background, our new world will be nil. If our new world is nil, we go into our while loop. We're going to set a timer. It's going to wait for 1 second. And I'm going to change this to 10 seconds just to make sure that we actually see our loading screen for 10 seconds. It doesn't take that long to load that very simple environment that we have. And then we're going to try again and see, has it loaded yet? And as long as it hasn't loaded, new world will be null. We will stay in that loop and we'll be waiting. One thing that we probably need to enhance on this at some point is if we fail to load it, that's an error loading it, it'll always stay in this loop because it never gets loaded. So that's another thing that we need to enhance in the script. But if that happens, we nicely exit this and say, sorry, you know, our game sort of screwed up. But that's not in there yet. Now that our world is properly loaded, it's time to actually make our world visible. But before we can do that, we have to fade back to black. We want to make the screen black again so that we can change things around without the user actually seeing it. We're now going to hide our loading screen. No longer interested in our loading screen. And now we're going to create an instance from our new world. So we're not actually getting a instantiated scene here. We're getting what's called a packed scene. It's purely the scene loaded is as a blueprint, you could say, as a class. So we're going to make an instance out of this. That instance is going to be assigned to our current world property. We're now going to add that as a child to our world scene. So we've removed the previous one. We've now loaded a new one, make it a child so that it actually becomes part of a scene tree. And then we call init world, and we're going to give it the player node. Let's double check. Yep, the player node is called the player node. So that is going to, on our base scene, that is going to call that function, in which case we're going to remember what our player scene is in our subscene. It's handy to be able to interact with that. You know, when we pick things up or drop things, we want to be able to interact with our player node. We're going to set our movement, pickup, and pointer based on how our scene is configured. So we're going to have to double check whether we configured that correctly in our shooting gallery, in our shooting place. And then we're going to position our player on our spawn point, which is then, let's double check if we call that player spawn point here. So let's go and, can we rename that safely? No, I don't think we can rename that safely. So we're going to do this the other way around. We're actually going to go and rename this one nicely player spawn point so that we actually use the correct node for this. I'm not renaming it in the scene because then our subscene suddenly has a problem because it's expecting that thing to be named differently. So I'm not quite sure what it will do. Better not experiment with that right now. Good. So that's all that is doing in init world. After that, we're going to hook up that signal. So that's going to make sure that when, you know, once we implement our selection screen, when we click on, I want to go to our shooting range, that's going to call back and say, hey, main scene, go and replace me with the shooting range scene. Next, we're going to assign the environment that we've configured in our subscene, in our world that we just loaded, as the environment that we actually want. So this switches it from our black back to our default environment. Or once we have our new outdoor environment, it will load up our HDRI and do all the stuff that we need to do over there. And finally, we're going to make our world scene visible. Again, remember, we're still faded to black. And actually, at this point, nothing changes. We render the world, and then we render a black quad over it, you see nothing left. So the last step that we need to do is tell our fade to black, we're done, go and fade back to what you were, and then we can see our scene. And the fade to black logic is smart enough that once it's completely faded out, it just disables itself, and nothing's rendered anymore. So we're not rendering a big transparent quad at the end for every frame. It just gets rendered when we need it. We remove it when we don't need it anymore. And that, in a nutshell, is the whole process. So in my background loading tutorial, we had split out over a number of functions that were calling signals and to trigger the next step in the process. Here it's all nicely chronologically ordered, so we can follow the whole process from loading, fading the screen to black, removing the current world, initializing our loading scene, fading to visibles that we see a loading screen, waiting until our new scene is loaded, fading back to black, removing our loading scene, adding in our new scene, and then fading back to transparent again, and we're in our new environment. So obviously we're going to change that back to 1 in a second. I'm just doing this so that we can actually see what's happening. So if we've done everything right, let's get our headset ready. We should see that we actually have a typo. Interestingly enough, exactly the same typo I made before. There we go. And that one's wrong. So left pointer pressed. We hooked that up to the wrong one. Ha! That is interesting. That was a little silly of me. Let's stop that. That shouldn't actually be on the pointers because that is actually activating the pointers. That should actually have been, let's go, on the left hand itself. So let's go and unlink this, disconnect. On our left hand, button press, connect. And this time we can leave that the name that it is. So now we should be able to move that code over there. There we go. And now we repeat the same thing on our right hand. Disconnect, right hand, button pressed, connect, boom. Did I just, no, I did do that the right way around. There we go. That goes over there. That goes over there. That goes over there. Boom. All right. Did we do it right this time? Oh, it's loading. Nope, it's not loading. Fade it. The value of type. Oh, so that's again something we've named differently. And I think the reason for that is, ooh, that's very silly of me, because we now have the viewport VR in front of it. We actually do need to rename these guys. Let's go and make our life a little easier by creating variables for that. So black is going to be color viewports. Here we go. Here's a black. Boom. Let's start with that one. We're just doing one by one. Hold on, make that bigger again so I can actually see what I'm doing. Let's actually do that one so that we know that we've got them all. Boom. Boom. I could probably do a find and replace, but I always like for these sort of things to just verify that I'm changing the right fields. It's a little bit more work, but that's okay. There we go. There we go. And now it says 0 matches, so we've done all of those. We'll do the same with our, let's do our world scene next, because it's the next one that we use. World scene is viewports. Whoa. World scene, there we go. Boom, boom. Same deal. Just replace them. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. That's all of those. Next one. Unready. That's our player. Viewport player. Oops. One more. There we go. World environments. That one was here. Boom. I think we only have that twice in there. One time over here. And one time over here. Yep. And our loading screen. Loading screen, there we go. All right. Boom. Okay, that's the last one. All right. Have redone everything now. Alright, so it didn't wait for 10 seconds. That's interesting. It's loaded it. That's a good thing. Why did it not wait for 10 seconds? Probably because it was already, that's why, because it's already loaded. Yeah. Alright. So, that makes sense. Because it's so fast in loading this very simple scene, because, you know, I think if I would have had my original shooting range with all the textures and everything like that, that would take long enough that it would actually get in here. But by the time that we faded to black, set up our loading screen, faded black to transparent, we get to this method here, our scene is already loaded. So it never gets into this while load. Therefore, it never goes over here. So just to simulate it, I'm actually going to add an extra wait over here. We're going to go and wait for 10 seconds over here because I just want to see that loading screen come up properly so that we can see whether we've done the right thing. So we're in black space, so where are you, loading screen? All right. So, do I see anything inside? No, it's already gone there. So, something's still not working right. So let's go and figure out what that is. Why are we not seeing our loading screen properly? So there's our logo. Alright. We have no code in there, so I don't have the version here that reorientates. Did I do that over here? Because I might want to actually put that in if I have that here. I do. Aha. Alright. We're going to go and copy this because that makes life a little nicer. This just makes sure that if we're not looking towards our logo, this code will rearrange everything to do that. So give her no. Let's see if there's anything. So there's a pivot in here. Okay, so that's something that we need to fix. Loading screen, the logo. So how do I have that here? So we've got our loading screen, then we have a pivot, and then we have a splash. So we just have a spatial here, I'm guessing, called pivot. And then we have a, yeah, and I think our pivot is at the center of, yeah, exactly. So that one is at the center of our screen, so we actually rotate around the center. That's why we're doing it. Else we would rotate around the center of our Godot logo. That's not what we want. But I don't think that makes a difference as far as what we're doing. I think our other problem is if we are going to our AR/VR camera, is not very far. So when we're looking at our loading and we're looking at where our, that's at minus 200, so it's 200 meters away from our player. I'm doing that so that if you move around, because you can still obviously, you know, even though we've centered the player at the center of our scene, if I'm in, you know, if I'm in the loading screen and I get off on my chair and I walk out towards the other side of the room, I'm still walking that far. So by putting the logo that far away, I'm never going to get very close to that logo unless we are in a unless you have a quest on your and you're walking outdoors. You actually walk 200 meters, then you might get close to the to the logo. So that's why we're doing that. But that does mean that our far point is not far enough. Now I don't want to make this too much, so we're going to put that to 500. That's good enough for me. Let's see if we can now see our logo. There we go. There's a logo, but we're not tracking. Why are we not tracking? Here we go. Oh, that was our normal loading stuff. Oh, and we haven't set up our camera yet, so that's why it just stayed in the place that it was. So now we need to go over here, and for this we do need to have editable children on, else we can't have access to that. So even though we're not really changing anything, I'm turning editable children on players so that we have access to the subnodes. And therefore we can go over here and we can assign our AR/VR camera as the camera. So now the difference should be, once it starts working, is that when you see when I rotate and I hold it steady, you see that the Godot logo slowly goes to the front of the player. So even if the player ends up standing backwards, eventually the logo will come around and the player will know that they're not in a completely black room. And after that, we load up. Now the other thing, of course, is this is our starting point. We're looking against the wall. I really want my starting point to be like that. So we're going to go and make that work as well. I think it's time to get rid of our little workaround, our little thing to make it wait for 10 seconds. That's nice for testing, but we don't really want that in there. Let's go into our shooting range. There we go. So I'm okay with everything being on except for the pointers. So we don't need the pointers. So we're going to go to our spawn point. There we go. And we're going to rotate that guy. Boom. And I just want that so that we can see how much. So we're going to rotate him 90 degrees. Should really put local on. Which one is that? I always forget. Well, can you tilt it? Yeah, so we can see that that one's changed 90 degrees. So now, when we load, we are immediately facing the right way. Right. Game 12, we've been streaming for 2 hours. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I think that sets us up for our next steps. We now have our background loading working in our weapons environment. We have we're using our new logic for OpenVR. We're using our new extra tools. The next step here now is to actually get a selection screen going and to then select between the shooting range and the outdoor range that I want to build. But I think that we have spent enough time on that tonight. So I am going to look at the live chat for a few minutes, see if anybody has any questions or any remarks or anything that they would like to know or talk about. So we'll stay online for a few more minutes, and if everybody's happy, then we'll call it a night. Well, a night to me. I don't know what time it is for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. I obviously have a, I think it's about a 20-second delay before you guys hear what I'm saying. So I'm just keeping my eye on the chat. I don't know how quickly we're going to get some reactions in there. So, Yeah, obviously I need to do a lot more cleanup in the file structure. I think a lot of the stuff that's in here, especially in models, I'm going to move into assets. Other things I'm going to move into the scenes folder just to make a good separation for that. But we'll have a play around with that. The other thing is we've got our freshness shader in here for changing the way that the objects that you pick up look, but we've done a lot of work around that in the interaction tutorials. So part of that is down in extra tools. We don't actually have to have that in our project here. That's something that we're going to have to clean up. So yeah, still plenty of work to sort of polish it up. The idea that I have is that I want to bring it to a point where I've got the outdoor range, and then the next tutorial is actually going to be about projectiles, shooting projectiles, so shooting a sniper or things like that, something that we need a longer range for. But I figured that it makes more sense to do all this work in a stream so you guys can follow along, instead of going through half an hour of introduction in the next tutorial session, just doing all this stuff. We've already handled most of this in the background loading stuff. It makes more sense that it is on stream. You're welcome, Parmin. I hope you guys enjoy this. I hope this is useful. I'm going to put these things raw on YouTube. I hope that YouTube is going to keep it. I have no idea how that works, so hope I don't lose it. But if all goes well, then this will just be a video that anybody can watch later on. They can have a look at this. I'm not going to condense this into a mini tutorial or something like that. Everything that we talked about tonight is stuff that have already handled in other tutorials. We've just applied it to a real environment here and cleaned up a whole bunch of things. So yeah. Alrighty. Well, there don't seem to be any more things being said in chat, so I think that I'm going to finish it off here. If everybody's okay with that. It's what time are we living right now? We are living 3 minutes to 12, so it's definitely time for me to call it a day. Thank you all for joining me in the stream. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'm not sure how regularly I'm going to do this, whether I'm going to do this once a week or maybe a couple times a week or maybe once every couple of weeks, or just like tonight do it really ad hoc because I've got something that I want to do, and I figure might as well do it on stream so people can follow along and learn how I'm doing these things. I'm putting the stuff together, what my decision making around this is. I don't know yet. Give me some feedback, I would say. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention, almost forgot about that. Let me double check something. Where are we at right now? Have we made it yet? You want to go have a look here. Yes, 4,003. We have reached 4,000 subscribers, which is amazing, especially considering that about a year ago, year and a half, that's really when I started doing all this VR stuff. I think I was, I don't know, 200, 300 subscribers just from some hobby stuff that I posted. So yeah, making it through 4,000 subscribers today, that is just surreal, absolutely surreal. Obviously there are much bigger YouTube channels for Godot out there, but for what I'm doing in my little niche, I'm really really happy about where I am. So on that note, I might do a separate announcement over the weekend, but I want to do something for 4,000 subscribers. One of the suggestions that was made was maybe doing a Q&A, just asking you guys to post a bunch of questions on that video, and then I can do a video with some answering some questions, or something else. I'm not sure. Put some ideas in this video's comments, I'd say. All right. I think that's really it for tonight. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed my first stream, and I hope we'll have many, many more after this. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.